Yes, sir.
Everyone is online?
Sir, one or two have not joined. They will join, sir.
Okay. Never mind.
Sorry. Uh,
Can we start?
yeah, we can start, sir. We can start, sir. We are good to go. So, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the day one of the GATE Reservoir class. We are going to start the session.
ठीक है. So okay. Um.
Yes.
Can we know? Can we know how? Can we just have a brief introduction of the participants so that I may know them? Is it possible? How many people are
Yes,
there?
sir. I'm telling their name.
Please. Yeah,
So,
sure.
Vengala Venkata,
And mention their
Vengala
college.
Venkata,
Mention their college also. College
Vishwa,
name.
Vijay, Yogesh, and
Nikhil, can you mention the college name also?
sir. After this class, can you do, sir, that one?
Okay, never mind. Let me just check the
Okay,
names.
sir.
Surya M, Tarun Gupta, Khan, Terence, Yesh, Vijay. Okay, so what I essentially wanted to know is if I switch to Hindi sometimes, will the class be comfortable or not? So it turns out that there is some, also
Yeah,
have
sure,
some,
sir.
we also have some students from Andhra Pradesh, I think. So I think we should mainly stick to English. If a certain
Yes, sir.
if some certain students they want explanation in Hindi, then I can provide. Okay. So feel free to ask your questions
Sure, sir.
anytime
Sure.
during. Feel free to ask your questions anytime during the discussion, and also after the
Yes,
class, I
sir.
will give you my mail. You can ask your questions. And so just before starting the reservoir part, so we are starting with the reservoir fluids part. I want to give you the brief idea about GATE. So GATE, as far as reservoir engineering is concerned, um, will essentially limit itself to asking questions that are very conceptual and also numerical questions. So that the numerical questions will generally test your understanding of the concept, and generally they are straightforward, but some questions may be tricky. So what I essentially want you to know is uh, in the 100 marks paper, even if you, I mean, there will be some questions that will be difficult. There will be some tricky questions, and those questions are limited to 8 to will on their marks weightage. If you weigh those questions, these will be limited to 8 or 10 marks. Rest 90 questions, the rest 90 marks can be easily attempted straightforward. These are essentially straightforward questions with medium level difficulty and easy questions. So the basic our basic approach should be to strengthen our fundamentals to that level so that we can at least solve all the easy questions and all the medium level difficulty questions. Regarding in those 8 to 10 marks that I said, some questions will also be factual. uh, they will test your understand your memory. They will seek whether you know certain information or not, and these questions really you can't prepare for these questions. But reservoir engineering, being very conceptually rigorous, the greatest advantage is that if you have understanding, then you are very certain that you are going to score. For a subject like offshore, for a subject like HSC, or for a subject like production, there may be things, there may be questions that fall outside. Can you unmute? Someone is disturbing. Yes. I was saying, for those questions, there may be certain questions that will fall outside the ambit of your knowledge, and these will be factual questions, so you cannot attempt those questions. But for reservoir engineering, I am very certain that you will be able to attempt 100% questions, and it is a very scoring subject if you understand the theory well, if you understand those concepts well. And regarding our curriculum, the way we will proceed. So essentially, first in the first half of our lecture series, we will be covering about reservoir fluids. So the first chapter is of course the reservoir fluid composition. We will know what is the reservoir fluid made up of. Then we will know about phase behavior, the thermodynamic properties of the reservoir fluids, and the changes that they undergo with respect to pressure and temperature. next topic will be the behavior of gases, how gases behave, and there are various equations and concepts that we will learn along the way, and all are linked to the central idea of thermodynamics. And the next there will be, we will discuss about the properties of reservoir liquids and the various parameters. The last part of the discussion will end with PVT analysis, which will be essentially the lab tests that we carry out in order to derive useful information as a reservoir engineer to employ for a greater subsurface understanding of the system. What information can we extract by subjecting the reservoir fluid to certain amount of tests, to certain tests? What information can we extract, and what is their value, and how do we use it in the evaluating and understanding the reservoir? So PVT analysis. So these are the 5 chapters that we are going to cover in the reservoir fluid section. The next section, it will mostly start after 1 week gap. After we cover this, we will take 1 week gap and we'll start this. And I will regarding the schedule, Nikhil, and we will really work that out, and we will let you know when and how things pan out. The next major chunk is actually about the reservoir rock. So we will discuss about the reservoir rock properties, and we'll discuss things like relative permeability. We'll discuss things like capillary pressure, and then the variation of permeability, heterogeneity of the reservoirs, how to characterize them, and also some idea about the fluid flow in porous medium, and then how do we test those properties of the reservoir rocks? How do we, for example, how do we determine properties such as porosity and permeability in lab tests? And after the reservoir rocks chapter, then we will take another gap, and then the major chunk that will remain will be oil well performance, gas well performance, and material balance and water influx. So these are and of course water flooding. Water flooding, that will be our so this is a brief breakup of how we are going to proceed. So having said that, anyone has to ask any questions, or we should start with the subject right away? We can start?
Yes, sir, we can.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So first things first, the petroleum that we find in the reservoir is indeed we recover actually a lot of substances from the petroleum. For example, aviation turbine fuel, ATF. We also recover petrol, what you otherwise known as gasoline. Also, diesel, kerosene, lubricating oils, and there are various other fractions also. So these fractions are different, and they have very distinct properties of their own, but they all come from a single source, indicates that the mixture that from which we are recovering them, that the mixture from which we are recovering must be very complex. It has a lot of components, lot of distinct components which behave in a particular fraction, in a particular way, and there are various ways of characterizing our fluids. There are various ways of characterizing our fluids. For example, the one that I have written on the top, ATF, petrol, gasoline, these are the fractions. These are the fractions, useful fractions that we recover from the reservoir fluid, and we use it according to certain specifications. But as far as the interest of the reservoir engineer is concerned, and you have to understand that even if we call something as ATF, even if we call something as petrol, two petrols are never same. They do not have the fixed composition. A certain fraction of individual components, a certain fraction of individual components, say we can say C4 to C12. We can say C4 to C. I hope you are familiar with the nomenclature. C4 means 4 carbon paraffinic series, 4 carbon alkane. So that will be like propane, butane, butane, pentane, hexane. So propane to propane onwards, if we go and we will stop at C12. So if our fluid system, if the refined fluid system essentially consists of C4 to C12, then we can say, okay, C5 to C12, whatever it is, we can say it is gasoline or it is petrol. But individually, how much C5 and how much C6, that does not matter. And you can never find two petrol systems which are identical, because in some the C5 fraction may be 20%, in another system C5 may be say 18%, C5 may be 23%, and to find an exact combination that two petroleum fractions will be exact composition wise is very difficult. So this kind of classification, unfortunately, while it is of great significance to the production engineer and the refining engineer, because these are the useful.
Are you showing your presentation?
Go ahead, what are you saying?
Sir, are you showing your presentation?
Yes, I have shown the presentation. Can't we see it?
No, sir. No, sir. We are in PE lecture series folder. We can't able to see the presentation.
Really?
Yes, sir.
I am screen recording. Just a minute. Discard. Can you see?
Sir, stop your sharing and start again, sir.
Can you see this?
No, sir.
Yes or no?
No, sir. No, sir. We are in your PE
We can't see the
lecture series
PowerPoint,
folder.
sir. We are in the.
Now?
No, sir.
Okay, just a minute. Just a minute. Let me. Sorry.
Yes, sir. We are able to see.
Okay. Okay, so now we can go ahead, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So whatever is essential. So should I start from the beginning?
Yes, sure, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. So what I was saying, that we recover a lot of fractions from petroleum which are useful and which we use for certain specific purposes. For example, aviation turbine fuel, ATF. This is used in your flights, your aviation, whatever you are using for aviation. It is a very high quality fuel and very costly too. Then there is petrol. There is gasoline. Petrol is also known as gasoline. Then there is kerosene, diesel, lubricating oils, etc. Right. So what I'm trying to say here is, uh, these are all fractions, and these predominantly consist of certain certain composition of individual uh, uh, alkane series, or individual, say we can say components, individual carbon components or individual hydrocarbon components. A certain approximate composition of that will generally be petrol, will generally be gasoline. So as I said, petrol will generally be C5 to C12. So we say if it is C5, if it is say C12 plus, it may let us say if it is C20 plus, then it will be a lubricating oil. It will be a very viscous thick fluid, and it will be a lubricating oil. So depending on, because it contains, depending on the carbon fraction that we're talking about, depending upon the concentration of the individual components, um, we have defined it in terms of ATF, petrol, whatever fractions that we recover, and in terms of their usability. I also mentioned that petrol, two different petrol samples, although we call them petrol, are never same, because one petrol sample may have C5 something percent and C8 something percent, C10 something percent. This composition of C5, C6, C7, C8 up to C12 or C13 is very unique to a single petrol system, to a single refined fluid. So another petrol might have another different composition. So in all, even when we consider that the refined products are in itself so non-homogeneous and so complex, then the parent fluid from which we are recovering that refined system must be increasingly and more complex, and must be even more difficult to characterize. From a reservoir engineering perspective, from the perspective of the reservoir engineer, the classification of petroleum in these bases, on the basis of its usability, is not of much use, because it provides us with no meaningful information regarding the variation of the physical properties of the oil system in the subsurface with respect to pressure and temperature. Whether your oil has great amount of ATF, or whether your oil has great amount of petrol, whether it gives predominantly lubricating oils, it does not provide us quantitatively any meaningful information about. But for the refining engineer or for the production engineer, it is important, because this is sales. This is sales. This is money. ATF, great. It fetches a lot of money. For if we can refine the oil and produce a lot of ATF, then we will prefer that oil, prefer that cube. So for this kind of classification may not be very suitable for reservoir engineers. So what we want another. There are different types in which we classify. One will be the compositional model. Another will be the black oil model, regarding which these are the two models that we use as reservoir engineers, and which give us the information that we seek, regarding which we will discuss in the subsequent slides. So let me just go through this slide so that you understand. Okay, so once you have appreciated the complexity of the system, so they must have different physical and chemical properties, so different flow properties, different colors also. So the physical, different refractive index, different response to fluorescence. So we can classify the crude oil system based on its response, based on its behavior in each of these characteristics. For example, what is its color? There will be different types of crude oils. For example, what fraction does it give? ATF, gasoline, this that is another classification. For example, what is its response to fluorescence? That is another. So, for example, what is its density also? Depending on density also we can classify. So these are all different tools that we will briefly study about in the subsequent slides in detail, and then we will go forward to solve certain questions based on them. But petroleum in its essence is essentially a mixture of hydrocarbons. It will also have certain inorganic components. For example, it will have some amount of carbon dioxide, sulfur, nitrogen, and metal compounds, but mostly it will be hydrocarbons, right? And yes, so point number 3, petroleum deposits occurring as a gaseous state are termed natural gas, in the liquid state as petroleum or crude oil, and in the solid state as so it's a very interesting thing that even in the subsurface you can find petroleum as solid. You can depending on its flow properties. So for example, depending on the pour point of the oil, POUR, POINT, whenever you are finding a term, so I will encourage you, because this is a production engineering term, pour point, you write it down and you will look it up in the in Google or in search the internet and find what it means if you can't understand it. So that will also encourage you to self-investigate. So I will also give you certain links, certain useful links, as even as the discussion progresses. I will give you certain links which are very useful, and certain I will also give you certain questions that will that I won't answer, but that will give a very good food for thought, so that you can engage with your own self and read certain materials, go about surfing the internet and find certain useful things. Okay. So what we term as gas, liquid, and solid, it is essentially based on our observation in the surface. So we are seeing from our well stream, we see that certain amount of gas we have recovered, certain amount of liquid we have recovered, and also certain amount of solids, right? So we know. So can we say that it is exactly in this same ratio that it is existing in the subsurface? It is not. So definition, our definition is based on normal temperature and pressure. So it is also known as the STP, or the stock tank conditions. So the stock tank conditions, as we'll see later, is the amount and the properties of the system as measured when the pressure is 14.7 psia and temperature is 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Right. So next slide. Yeah. Yeah. So the appearance of the fluid that we have, the color. I was telling that the color is also very varies a lot. So we can recover a very clear liquid. The clear liquid generally we recover for condensates. I mean for retrograde condensation, if it is occurring in the reservoir, then the wet gas system will generally give colorless uh, condensate. And generally the oil, we can also have green colored liquid, we can also have orange colored crude oils. The color varies, and uh, it is principally dependent on another property of the on the composition of asphaltenes and resins. These are the essential components that impart color to the crude oil system, regarding which we are again going to discuss. So this is the brief introductory slide, just bear with me. Principal elements. So if you in any crude system, maybe the density will be as low as 0.7 or 0.6, say, or the density may be as high as 0.98 or 0.99. So, or maybe it is very highly viscous, or maybe it is very low viscous. So take any crude, and if you break it down to its elemental composition, you will find that it is carbon 84 to 87% and hydrogen 11 to 14%. So this law never fails. Carbon, the essential composition, elemental composition, but not component composition, not the composition of methane, ethane, and propane. So these will vary, but carbon in itself and hydrogen in itself, elementally, they will be in this almost fixed ratio, 84 to 87, 11 to 14. So something very interesting is happening here. So elemental composition is somehow not able to explain the physical properties of our crude or the chemical properties of our crude. That is because um, uh, more important than the amount of or the ratio of carbon and hydrogen is uh, how these carbon and hydrogen atoms are arranged in the crude system. How it is arranged means what is the length of the average, what is the average length of the paraffinic series that you are finding? What is the average? Are there double bonds or not? How much oxygen is there? All these, how much carbon dioxide is there? How much nitrogen is there? All these properties, they will invariably affect all these questions, and all the answers to these questions, they will invariably affect the chemical and physical properties of the oil. Yes, water is again another liquid that is compulsorily found in every reservoir. It has to exist because initially all reservoir systems are only water. The oil breaks from the uh, shales or the limestones that is below the reservoir rock, and then it because of the pressure, overburden pressure, and then it will migrate to the reservoir rock, and it will displace the water. So certain amount of water is always trapped in the reservoir rock, and it may flow into our well stream, and we often recover a fixed percentage of water in our well stream. Yeah. Again, the water, an interesting point about the water that we recover, it is also this amount of salts dissolved in that water. These will be very important considerations when we consider phenomena such as scaling, inorganic scaling. For example, it has a lot of calcium ions, and also your for example, it has calcium ions, and for example, your completion fluid or the fluids that you use in the well have a lot of carbonate ions. So it is very likely that those calcium and carbonate ions will react and will form a precipitate like CaCO3. And it becomes a huge problem. It will plug the entire well bore and no production will commence, and you will be wondering what really happened. It is because of the incompatibility of these fluids. So it is very important to understand that the whatever water that we are producing, we also need to know its concentration of the salts in it and its physical properties, such as its density and viscosity and other considerations. Yeah. So we discussed in the earlier slide that there are two models essentially, compositional and Blackwell model. In the compositional model, we are trying to determine. So it is a very straightforward model. So here we are saying that okay, we have got a crude oil system or we have got some system. Then we want to know in that system how much C1 is there. C1 means methane. How much C2 is there. C2 means ethane. How much C3 is there, and we will go on. We will go on till eternity and till the maximum. Maybe there is one C100, maybe there is some C250 or something. We will go on and we'll determine how much it is there. How many moles per 1 mole of this, or say how many moles per this many moles of this. So we can quantify, and we can test it by some advanced instruments that we have in our labs. We can quantify this is this, and then once you have defined that okay, this has this many systems, we have got one system, and with that system we can do certain tests. We can do certain tests and we can see based on the changes in pressure and temperature how this system is behaving, for a sample, and then we can extract useful information from that. So that is one kind of approach to solving the problem. But it is at the same time the process of computation, it involves a lot of computational cost. We need to do a lot of calculations because with every subsequent pressure drop or change, the phase itself changes, the system itself changes. For example, when your pressure goes down below the bubble point pressure, gas from the solution, gas that was originally dissolved in the crude, starts evolving and emerges as a new and a free phase. That means the crude that was earlier there is not the crude that it is now. So with each pressure drop and with each pressure change, our system itself is changing. So how do you go about describing that? That means for each pressure change, we need to predict what will be the new system, and then we will have to calculate the composition of the new system and then determine its properties, and then we will have to subject it to another pressure change and then determine its properties and subject to another. So it's okay, it is possible, it is feasible to be done, but it involves huge computational costs, and often so you use advanced softwares and simulations to go about computational modeling, but the easier way generally to do it is to consider the reservoir system as consisting of some stock tank oil and some gas. So we are saying that certain amount of gas is dissolved in the subsurface system because of the pressure, because of the high pressure. Certain gas is dissolved in the crude oil, and when that pressure is released and when it comes to surface, it will give certain amount of gas. So if we can know how much gas it gives and how much oil we have, then it's a very useful way of predicting the reservoir system. And we can say, so we are saying that the crude system that is there essentially consists of two components. It is certain amount of gas that will eventually evolve, and it is certain amount of or maybe even certain amount of free gas, and it is certain amount of oil. So this is the black oil model. But we are now, since we are considering the compositional model, we are discussing about the compositional model now, and its essential compositions that our crude oil system has. Okay, so we are since the major contributing factor, although there are inorganic components also in the crude oil system, since the majority of the composition is derived from hydrocarbons, we are using hydrocarbons to describe and understand our system. So hydrocarbons can be aliphatic and aromatics. Okay, so aliphatics will generally be alkanes, alkenes, and alkynes, as you can see from the chart. And cyclic aliphatics, these are called naphthenes. So generally they will have, they will be cyclic compounds, but without any double bonds or without any saturation. So the essential basis of the classification is we want to see how these carbon atoms are arranged in space. For example, if is it a straight chain? Is it a straight chain hydrocarbon system? For example, like this. For example, if I have C6, right? Assume that I have C6 xn. Okay, so I can write C6 in this way also. How many do I have? Okay, 6 carbon atoms. Are you familiar with this use organic chemistry? Some idea?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Good. So we can see C6. We can see that C6 can be represented in this way. We can also see that C6 may be represented in this way. We can also see C6 may be represented in this way. Sorry, this is a double bond. Okay. So this thing is benzene. This thing is cyclohexane. And this thing is just hexane, N-hexane. So although we have C6, we can find it in different ways. Benzene is part of aromatics. Hexane will be part of the alkanes or the paraffins, and cycloalkane will be part of the cyclic aliphatics or the naphthenes. Are you getting the point? So what matters is not just the how much C6, it also depends on the spatial arrangement of the carbon atoms and whether there is any unsaturated. What is the type of the bond that the carbon atoms share? Is there any double bond? Is there any triple bond? So we are asking questions, and these are the basis on the which these are the criteria on the basis of which we are classifying our system, right? Now we'll discuss about each of these fractions in detail, and we will determine how they affect the property of the crude oil system and their individual properties. Okay, next. Okay, so alkanes are open chain molecules. Again, if it is a straight chain, we call it, sorry. Yeah, if it's a straight chain, we'll call it alkane, something like this, or something like maybe this. It has to be a straight chain. And the bonds have to be saturated, meaning you cannot find a double bond here. You cannot find a double bond here. So if there is any unsaturation, saturation means that there is no double bond or no triple bond. All the bonds are saturated with hydrogen atoms. So it has the maximum hydrogen atoms that it can have. These are called alkanes. So if we have something like this without, so it is a straight chain and the bonds are saturated and without any double bonds, we say it is an alkane, and these constitute the majority of the fractions that we find in our crude system. Okay, the general formula of the alkane series is CnH2n+2. So for example, CH4 will be methane, very common. C2H6 will be ethane. It follows the general order CnH2n+2, right? And here for ethane it will be 2, N is 2, 2n+2 will be 6. 2 into 2 plus 2 is 6. For example, C3H8, this is propane, right? And so on. So these are the bulk fractions. They constitute the bulk of our crude oil system. And since you can see that there is no unsaturation here, there is no site of attack no site of electrophilic or nucleophilic attack or substitution or whatever, because all the bonds are already saturated. Unka man to already bhar chuka hai. So they all have each one has either 3 hydrogen atoms or 2 hydrogen atoms, and it's sharing 2 bonds. So it is a very stable and a very inert system chemically. It does not react, and it is very obvious, because if we do not have an inert or stable system and we are subjecting the reactive system to pressures of 5000 psi and temperatures of 120 or 130 degrees Celsius, then they will react, and it will be a very reactive mixture. We cannot find such reactive. We do not generally find such reactive components in crude oil systems, and most of the components are very stable components chemically. Okay, so so these are also known as paraffins. Okay, alkanes are also known as paraffins here, right? And as I mentioned here in our initial discussion, pentane to pentadecane. So this is like C5 to C15 here. We have written here C5 to C15 are the chief constituents of uncracked gasoline, petrol. So and so if you consider ATF, it will be even lesser. So something maybe C3 to C7 or C8. Higher members are waxy solids. Okay, so generally C1 to C4 will be gases not at reservoir condition. Gases means what? It is as we see it in our Stockton conditions, in our normal atmospheric conditions. So C1 to C4, because even C4, if you subject, even C1, even methane, if you subject it to certain amount of pressure and temperature, then it will be also liquid. It will eventually be a liquid. So when we say that C1 and C4 are gases, we mean that in the normal surface conditions, these are gases. C1 to C4 are gases, and maybe up to C15 are liquids, or C17. We'll check. Liquids, and the C17 plus, these are waxy solids. Wax, wax, candle, the wax. So they will have texture like that, and they will be waxy solids like that. So the higher members of the alkane series are waxy solids. Another interesting phenomenon that these alkanes exhibit is called isomerism, right? Just a minute. Yes. So what is this thing, isomerism? Right. Let us see. Let me rub. Okay. So we are discussing about hexane. Let us talk about hexane here. Hexane is this. Okay. So this is, we call this N-hexane. But even if I have this hexane, I can arrange the carbon atoms in such a way that they still remain open chain. They still remain without any saturation in a different way. For example, let me say 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and let me add one here. Okay, this is also hexane. Why is it not hexane? Because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It has 6 carbon atoms. It is open chain. It is not closed chain. It is open chain. And it has the same number of, it is also conforming to the general formula of CnH2n plus 2, right? And the bonds are also saturated. There is no double bond here. This is also hexane. So for example, if you can cut this, if you can cut this part, cut this guy here, and if you can put the bond here, that will be also another hexane. So this phenomenon is called, all of them are alkanes and all of them have very similar properties, but this phenomenon is called isomerism. When we have the same general formula, but different physical structures, different molecular structure. So this is, we generally have different names, N-butane, isobutane. We go about naming these things. So what I essentially want to say, even if you have the same general formula, there can be an alternative arrangement of the carbon atoms, and this phenomenon is called isomerism, right? Next. Okay, so here I have mentioned the chart. You can see there are essential components the chemical formula of them, and then the okay, some physical properties, boiling point, critical temperature. Of course, you might not be knowing right now, but we will discuss later. Focus on the boiling point part here. I will ask you a very interesting question at the end. Yes, and we discussed about this physical state. So we are saying, okay, so they are saying that up to C17 it is liquid, up to C4 it is gas, and C18 plus is waxy solids. Try to see the bubble point here and bubble point here. N-butane and isobutane, I was talking, these are isomers. These are isomers. They have the same number of carbon atoms and same chemical formula also, C4H10, but see, these properties are different. Okay, so unsaturated hydrocarbons, these are the ones, these are for example like this. Okay, let me add a double bond here. Okay, so these things are reactive because these are the sites of unsaturation, say for this atom and this atom. So invading species, chemical species can attack at this site and they can form new bonds so that it becomes saturated. So these are reactive species, and because of the huge pressure and temperature conditions in the subsurface, we generally do not find these in the crude oil system. So hardly ever you will never find alkenes, alkynes in our crude system because these are reactive species. In co-olefin, they are also known as olefins. Okay. Now our okay, so we do not find this. Now we are coming to naphthenes. Naphthenes are cycloalkanes. Okay, so yeah, these are naphthenes. These are naphthenes. So you can see the same we are as I told you, it is if it becomes a cyclic instead of being a free chain system, if it becomes cyclic, then we call it naphthene system. Okay, these are also stable and inert. Okay, because again there is no unsaturation where your invasive species can attack, and the properties are also very similar to alkanes. And after our alkane series, these are the second most important constituent of petroleum by volume or by moles, by bulk.
Guys, 2 minutes. Sir is coming.
So you can start, sir.
Okay, sure. Sorry for the.
No issue, sir.
Okay. So naphthalene we have also discussed. Next. Okay, aromatics. Yes. So aromatics. So you remember we use naphthalene balls in our to ward off these insects and bugs in our generally we use it in our where we store clothes. Generally, we will keep. So it is because of their odor that is they repel certain insects and bugs. And these compounds, aromatics, naphthalene is an example of aromatics. They generally have a very strong odor, which is why they derive their name really. So aromatics, they're characterized a very strong aromatic, and it has a closed ring structure, and there will be points of unsaturation. You have to remember this. But generally, these unsaturation or these double bonds, they follow a fixed pattern. For example, there will never be any um, two consecutive double bonds. So it is because of this closed ring structure, this compact structure, and the symmetry of the double bonds. These systems are also stable, while less stable than the alkanes themselves. These are also reasonably stable, and concentration wise, composition wise, we saw maximum was the paraffin or the alkane series, then it was the cycloparaffin or the cycloalkane series, and then we have aromatics, right? It is also okay. So we discussed that it is stable. Yeah. So the general for series, the formula for the general series is CnH2n minus 6. You can check. Benzene is C6H6, right? C6H6. So if you put n is equal to 6, 2 into 6 minus 6, 12 minus 6 is 6. So C6H6, it fits. And even for higher carbons, even for naphthalene and other series, you can find. We find these components also in our crude system. Asphalts and resins. So these are two very intricately related systems that we find in crude system, and they are responsible for the majority of the problems also. They impart the color of the crude together. They impart the color of the crude, and asphaltenes are not generally in the solution phase, and they exist as solids, colloidal system. It's a colloidal system. It's a colloidal suspension. In the general crude liquid system, they exist as colloids. And resins, these are huge sheet-like molecules, a number of rings. There may be all fused together, and centrally you might even sometimes find some rare metals like vanadium or copper or something that holds the entire system together as one asphaltene molecule. And they do not have any definite composition, but they are charged molecules, they are polar molecules. And asphaltene is generally stabilized by its corresponding partner, which is resins. Asphaltenes is the major constituent. It's the major problem also, because the asphaltene deposition is a problem. And to stabilize asphaltene, there are also systems like resins. So generally in the crude system, when you will have asphaltene, there will also be some resins around it, which will stabilize it because of the opposite charges of the both system. But in any case, asphaltenes and resins are not desirable components in the oil system. And asphaltene deposition is a very, very complex problem. You will learn about it in your production class. Yes. So asphaltene is not, you can refer to the last point of the asphaltene. Therefore, they are soluble in aromatic compounds such as xylene, but will precipitate in the presence of light paraffinic compounds such as pentane, right? So this is a very important property of asphaltene. So whenever there is an asphaltene deposition, now you understand why you use xylene. In our well stimulation jobs, when you find that, when you conclude from your observations that there has been an asphaltene deposition in the well bore, we generally go for a xylene job that goes and dissolves it. But again, it's a temporary solution, but it restores the production at least. And periodically, you will have to keep dosing the well with xylene to keep the production running. Yeah, but resins are readily soluble. You have to again remember this. And resins are not solids. Sorry, resins are not, colloids. Resins are not colloids, and they are readily soluble, unlike asphaltene. And these you can also view them as having lot of impurities. I mean, these are the essentially the maximum amount of impurities in terms of the inorganic elements is generally found in asphaltenes and resins. You will hardly ever find any oxygen or any nitrogen or any sulfur in the alkane series or any compounds of the alkane series. So it is so all the sulfur and the undesirable things, nitrogen, oxygen, these atoms you will find, because it's a huge molecule, it can accommodate one sulfur atom or say one vanadium atom or something. So yeah, asphaltene and resins. Okay, so I have written something here. Talk about AS by, okay. So CII, okay, we can come here. AS by RE. AS by RE is a very important parameter that we use to characterize the oil because we want to know whether it has the tendency of precipitation or not. So asphaltene, as I told you, asphaltene stabilize, sorry, resins stabilize the asphaltene. So even if the asphaltene is high and the resins is high, then the crude will also not precipitate asphaltene. You will not find the asphaltene deposition problem. So AS by RE is a very important parameter. SARA analysis is an analysis that we generally take to characterize the crude, again to determine problems for relating to wax deposition or say asphaltene deposition. To determine the tendency of the crude to have these problems, we determine this SARA analysis. It is called, S is for saturates, aromatics, resins, asphaltenes. SARA, SARA, saturates, aromatics, resins, asphaltenes, SARA analysis. And CII is it is called colloidal instability index, CII. So it is essentially colloidal instability means it will be asphaltene, okay, plus if you add the saturate series, okay. Saturates means your mostly alkane series, the one we discussed in the first. AS plus saturates, if you divide it by the rest, resins and aromatics, whatever you get, that is called colloidal instability index, right? So generally we say if so can you tell me if CII is high, then what is the tendency, and CII is low, what is the tendency? If CII is high, then remember that saturates, even if the saturates is high, higher member are waxy solids. Paraffins, higher members are waxy solids. So these if SA or AS or the sum of both is high, then there is a tendency of deposition. So generally we say if it is greater than 0.9, it is unstable. If it is less than 0.7, then it's good. Sorry, 0.7 here, 0.7. 0.7 is stable. If it is less than 0.7, it is stable. If it is greater than 0.9, it is unstable, right? Okay, so let us come to the non-hydrocarbon compounds. Yeah, generally less than 1%, very few compounds, but they have effect in properties. For example, it is even more important for the processing engineer or for the refining engineer, because they make their life hell, really. I mean, if there is sulfur, then you will have to wear a lot of protective equipments, and it is poisonous. H2S is poisonous, and then also the entire system will corrode, because it will, the catalysis, the entire process of catalysis, sulfur corrupts the entire system if it is beyond an acceptable limit. And oxygen, it will form some because in the process of refining, it will also come in contact with a lot of other streams, and this oxygen is likely to manifest itself in the form of carboxylic acids, high-end carboxylic acids, which are also very corrosive, and they will eat your equipments away. A lot of other problems are faced, and so although it is less than 1%, it also has a significant bearing on the properties of the crude and also for our processing, right? Typically represent 0.04 to 5%. Okay, if the combined non-hydrocarbon compound, so this is N, O, S, metals. Okay, So if you sum everything, then it will be definitely be less than 5%, right? So here, this point you have to remember definitely. Oil with S greater than 0.5% and gas with S greater than 4 ppm are considered sour. Okay. So if it is less than that, we call it sweet. Sweet. So sour crude and sweet crude, you must have heard about them. So this is the definition. And sour, for sour there is a different refining system, and for sweet crude there is also different refining system. And sulfur, as I told you, it occurs in both corrosive and non-corrosive forms. It can occur as elemental sulfur. Elemental sulfur will typically occur in the form of S8. S8 is the most stable, thermodynamically stable form. So it is S8 elemental sulfur. It is a solid, right? It can also come in the form of H2S. In the gas, we can also have H2S. Low molecular weight mercaptans. Mercaptans are essentially your SH thiols, like RSH, right? So ROH, you know, ROH is nothing but alcohol. When R is when R will be C2H5, it is our ethyl alcohol, daru. It is when it is CH3, it is methyl alcohol. So, okay, sorry. So if you replace this O by S, it becomes a thiol or a mercaptan. So if this R is low end, it generally it is low end. I mean, so CH3, C2H5, something like this, not like C20SH. Not, you won't find like that mercaptans like that. So sulfur generally occurs in these forms also. Okay. The non-corrosive forms is metal sulfide, because this is the end product of corrosion. Interestingly, so this hydrogen sulfide has also an acidic character. It dissolves in water and forms the hydrogen ions. These hydrogen ions attack the metal, and the metal goes into solution now. So M becomes M2 plus. The metal in the tubing becomes M2 plus 2 electrons, and the hydrogen here 2H plus, which from the acid, will react with the 2 electrons and become H2, right? And this electron chain is now served. And also sometimes even this M2 plus, and it can sometimes even this M2 plus and will go and get deposited or elsewhere, or these 2 electron may combine with another metal somewhere and it will deposit along the tubing. So one end of the tubing will be corroded and the other end of the tubing. So these are also problems, corrosion, a very huge problem in the tubing. And you need to know how much carbon dioxide is there, how much H2S is there, and what is the tendency of the corrosion. So metal sulfide, if you find, actually it is the end product of the corrosion. It is a corroded product. Hydrogen sulfide corrodes and forms metal sulfide. So metal sulfide is obviously a non-corrosive form because it is the product of the, okay. So sulfur compounds have a bad smell. H2S smells like rotten eggs and extremely undesirable and even unhealthy also, because if you are exposed to H2S, you will you have to remember the entire table. I mean, okay, this is not part of reservoir engineering, but H2S, regarding H2S, it is important from HSC for your HSC paper, health, safety and environment. So you need to know the H2S concentration that is permissible, its concentration, and the number of hours. Again, you have to remember, you have to commit it to memory. I do not remember it now, but I had remembered it then. So H2S, the concentration in ppm, and the number of hours that can be allowed for an oil personnel, the period of exposure that can be allowed. So these, whatever I'm saying, these are these things that are not directly related to reservoir engineering, but I encourage you to note it down elsewhere in your, I mean, some notebook, so that you can refer it later and you can, you know, enhance your preparation for other subjects also. Okay. So on combustion, these products will generate SO2 and SO3. So initially what happens, SO2 is generated, and this SO3, it combines with SO3 to form, it combines with atmospheric oxygen to form SO3. So you have something like, let's say S plus O2. Although it is not like S, so RSH or maybe S8 or some form of sulfur. Let us just assume that it is S for now. S plus O2 becomes SO2. Okay, and this O2 will, yeah, this is nascent oxygen and forms SO3. Okay, this occurs in the atmosphere. Remember, this is not the end product of, I mean, this is, although this is the end product, this is not the direct product of the combustion. So the combustion will generally release SO2, generally. But if a lot of oxygen supply is done, then even SO3 might be produced. And it can also combine with O in atmosphere and form SO3. And it is this SO3 that is the main culprit, and it will combine with atmospheric water, right, to form H2SO4, right, sulfuric acid. This causes acid rain. So again, I'm telling a lot of things. These are not reservoir engineering, but you should know. Oxygen. Again, content up to very less, 0.5% only. As I was telling, this oxygen will play a major role in the oxidation of the alkane series or some other fractions, and it will form naphthenic acids. So generally, you may have some ROH, or something like RCHO. This is aldehyde, or maybe like RCOR, ketone, alcohol. So the end product of each upon final oxidation will be RCOH. So RCOH is acid. Okay, these are naphthenic. Here the R will be like something like this or something like this. So cyclic. Okay, so naphthenic acids. And this COH, it is on distillation or during processing. This is why it is very important to quantify the amount of oxygen and whether it is acceptable or not. And they will form very corrosive acids, and your entire refinery system will go corrupt. Nitrogen is generally less than 0.1%, but can be as much as 2%. Nitrogen is generally very inert. It does not react. So for us, it is not a great problem insofar as the properties of the crude is concerned, or insofar as the adjustment to properties needs to be done, or insofar as the as its negative effects like H2S, like sulfur or oxygen. It is not so problematic, nor it is corrosive, but it reduces the quality, the calorific value of the fuel. I mean, who wants to burn nitrogen? We want to burn the fuel. I mean, if it has if it is above a certain high concentration, then we need to blend. We generally blend it with some pure again, so we need to blend it with some pure or the high quality natural gas, so that the overall concentration comes down at its acceptable limits. Okay. Carbon dioxide, again, common constituent. It is also a source of corrosion. Forms carbonic acid. So just like the mechanism that I told you happens in H2S, same happens here. H plus will be formed. H2CO3 is the acid. CO2 is H2O plus CO2 will form this. Sorry. H2O plus CO2. Okay. And this will become H plus HCO3 minus, or maybe even 2H plus and CO3 2 minus. So this H plus and this H plus that is generated, it will eventually go and attack the metal tubing, and then the metal will undergo corrosion. Other compounds, as I told you, in some little concentration we can find copper, nickel, vanadium, zinc. Natural gas may also, helium, again very inert, does not cause much problem. Hydrogen, mercury. Mercury is a metal, but it can vaporize very quickly. So mercury exists in the liquid state and the normal conditions, and sometimes in very rare amounts you may find in the gaseous stream. Okay. Inorganic compounds like water. Okay. I told you that they are very significant, and we need to know the their compatibility with our well fluids that we're using, typically with the injected fluids. If they're not compatible, then they may form scales, salts, scales. In injected fluids, ये तो छोड़ो, in completion fluids it may deposit along the tubing and you can solve it through some acid injection or through some acid spotting treatment. But if you're injecting the fluid in the formation and you have not optimized it, or if you have not characterized the formation water, then depending on the KSP, KSP, okay, it is called the solubility product. If it is exceeded, solubility product, then we can have precipitates. For example, barium, we have some calcium ions. Let us say we have calcium ions in the formation water, okay, and we are in the fluid that we are injecting, we have a lot of sulfate ions. A certain concentration of carbon, calcium and sulfate can be tolerated. SO4 2-. Okay, this is the concentration. The product of this concentration is called solubility product. So if this exists, if this product exceeds the solubility product, the individual concentration, then the precipitation will start, and it may happen. Who knows? So we need to characterize it and determine the concentration of the individual ions and their compatibility with our injected fluids. Okay, otherwise it will form as CaSO4 or some other salt maybe. Okay, so characterization factor. Nice. This is called Watson's characterization factor. So he says we found another way to characterize our fluid system. So he said that, okay, you can find the boiling point. You can find the boiling point of the fluid system. You can find the gamma O, or the density, I mean your specific gravity, and then you calculate this Kw. Okay, and if this factor is to 12.5 or greater, then the fluid system is predominantly paraffinic, right? If this is less than 10, okay, it will be aromatic. Tendency of the crude will be aromatic. It will have a lot of aromatic compounds. So yes, this is Watson's characterization action. Remember the formula and remember this thing: 12.5 and 10. Okay. Yeah. So we had discussed in the very first slide that we are using two models: black oil model and the compositional model, right? So I have a very interesting diagram, and I hope you understand here. Okay, this is our black oil model. So you understand this thing. Now, what you're saying, this thing is the oil, okay, and this thing is the gas. So we are saying there is some gas which will eventually come out. We call it solution gas, and there is some oil which is stock tank oil. And if you combine these two, and we will reach the. If you combine these two and take it to the reservoir conditions of pressure and temperature, these are the surface conditions. These two. This and this, if we combine these two in the ratio that we are obtaining it, the RS, the GOR, and for 1 meter cube of oil, maybe we are recovering 300 meter cubes of gas. So if we are combining it in the specific ratio, and if we are taking that system to the reservoir, then we are then this is the resulting system. Then this is the resulting system, and we can predict the behavior accordingly. But this is not what exactly happens. It is not like there is some solution gas here readily waiting to be evolved, and it is not like some crude oil is there. I mean, some oil is there, liquid phase is there, which is readily becomes liquid phase on the surface. It does not happen like that. Even in the crude system that we have here, there will be some fractions of methane. There will be, in fact, a lot of a greater fraction of in the crude oil. There will be methane because it is dissolved, because it is not in methane alone, because there are a lot of other compounds. So we find that it is in the liquid state. In the liquid state you can also find C1, okay, and in the gas phase you can also find C7 or maybe C8, C10. Who knows? The concentration will obviously be very less, but you can find it. And this thing keeps on changing as the system changes. Below the bubble point, the reservoir system undergoes a change. Below the bubble point, the reservoir system undergoes a change, and the system is never constant. For example, gas is gas, as the gas is being continuously evolved, free gas is being continuously evolved from your crude, the crude is never remaining constant. Up until the bubble point, what is happening when the pressure is declining, there is some expansion of the system, but the gas has not evolved. The gas is still trapped in the crude system, and the composition remains same, although the volume is changing. The volume is changing up until the bubble point, the volume is changing, but the composition of the system remains constant. But below the bubble point, the gas itself that was dissolved in the crude oil is now in the reservoir oil, it now breaking free, and it becomes an independent phase of its own. There's a gas phase now. So the gas phase will now have certain concentrations, gas phase, and the oil phase will now have certain concentrations. So the gas phase will predominantly have the lighter fractions. If I have crude oil, say the initial composition of the crude, maybe let us say assume that which is 30%, sorry, it is 40% methane, some 30% ethane, and 10% propane, and the rest is C7, hexane, sorry, heptane. Okay, so we are assuming this, right? So when initially the gas will evolve, what do you think will evolve first? Initially methane has the greatest tendency to become gas, and so methane will preferentially evolve from the oil to become gas. But it will not be methane alone. Methane will come more, but others will also come. So this will be greater. This will have 90% methane, 6% ethane, 2%, sorry, 3% this propane, and 1%. Okay, something like this. Okay. And here, if you see, the initial composition that was there now has changed, because 90% of the methane is this thing that is here. It is no more part of this oil that was there when it was a single system, greater than PB, P greater than PB. So here, this oil is very different from this oil, and with each successive change in pressure, the system is also undergoing change. I want you to appreciate this fact, and hence it is not very simplistic to say, it is not very ideal to say that certain gas is there and certain gas this is coming out, and this thing becomes crude. But anyway, these are simplifications, and this black oil model, this is called the black oil model. It is a very simplistic model, it does not take into account the thermodynamics that is of the change, but for a greater part, for large part, it also serves our purpose. We do not need such an accurate description of the reservoir system most of the time, but sometimes it might be necessary. So what really happens is the compositional model, right? I will show you this. Okay, this diagram you can see. So this is our reservoir fluid, right? You can see this individual components here. You can see the gas at the surface condition and the oil at the surface condition. Okay, so these are the lighter fractions. C1, you can see majority of the C1 is at here, is at gas, but that does not mean that C1 is not here. C1 is also here, and this is the heavier fraction. Heavier fraction is mostly here in the oil in the oil state, in the liquid state. But that does not mean that heavier fraction is not here also. It is also here. So this is also a heavier fraction. You get my point. So this is the compositional model in which we are modeling we are subjecting this reservoir fluid to pressure changes, and we are determining the concentration of each phase of what is the composition of the oil phase, what is the composition of gas phase at this pressure, next pressure drop, what is the composition of the gas phase, oil phase, next pressure. We go about decreasing the pressure until we reach the atmospheric pressure, and then we have an entire suite of information which you can use to model the reservoir. Okay, so this is the compositional model.
So, sir, up to bubble point, there is change in volume, but there is no change in composition.
Correct.
And after bubble point, there is change in volume and also change in composition.
That is correct. Change in volume will also happen. Change in volume is the only event. Change in volume is, I thought it is unlikely that change in volume will occur, because when you are decreasing the pressure, I mean, the thermodynamic response is there will be some change in volume.
Yes.
Okay. Any other question? Okay.
Sir, can you explain the composition model again?
Oh, sure. Never mind. Okay. So what I'm saying, this is oil at bubble point. Okay, we will eventually discuss bubble point, but since I've asked, let me just tell you, oil, but below the bubble point we have a single phase. Above the bubble point we have a single phase, right? So it is in liquid state. This one is oil. Okay, we can say this is oil, and our pressure is, it will have certain composition. Okay, let me just tell you here also. Even this is the reservoir fluid, na? Let us assume that this fluid is at, say, maybe 2000 psi. Okay, and let us assume our bubble point pressure PB is say something like 1200 psi. Okay, so if you are continuously withdrawing material from the reservoir continuously, then if this pressure is going to fall, one day this pressure will fall below the 1200 psi because you are continuously withdrawing material. Pressure of the system is going to fall. There will not be sufficient voidage compensation. Pressure of the system will fall. When the pressure goes below 1200 psi, the gas that is dissolved here will now start to come out of solution. So this oil that was in one phase, the only phase that was here, liquid, there will now be two phases. In the pore of the reservoir, you will find two phases now. Already there was two phases, because water we should also consider water is also another separate phase. Oil and water, so let us call liquid. So what I'm essentially trying to say, gas phase will evolve out of the liquid phase, right? So now in the pore space, now let us say this is my pore, and let us say this was my water. Okay, this is my water will be along the walls, and this is my oil here it was entirely oil, right? Now this thing will now become, the water will remain unchanged, but now the oil is like this, and there is some gas here. So this gas has come from this only, this oil here has released some gas. So now this oil is not similar to this oil because the compositions are different. Are you getting my point? So
yeah, I get it.
Yeah, so now so we want to know, and again with subsequent production, another pressure drop will happen, and then this oil will give some pressure drop. Now this will be gas. This is gas. This oil is different from this oil. Again, this process will go on. Another crude liquid will obtain, which will be different from this. So at each stage, so let us say we are having a fixed, we are measuring at each pressure drop of 100 psi. Okay. So for each 100 psi, this oil, now 100 psi, another oil, 100 psi, another oil, 100 psi, another oil. So if we can track this in the lab of the original virgin reservoir fluid, then we can know how the concentration of the compounds, concentration of the components is changing in each phase. So for each pressure drop here, suppose here I am measuring what is in this gas, what is how many C1, how many C2, how many C3. In this, how many C1, how many C2, how many C3, I measured. In this, how many C1, how many C2, C3. So for each phase, for the gas phase, I am measuring the composition at each pressure drop. The predetermined pressure drop, you can go for 50 psi, 10 psi, whatever. Okay, depending on the extent of accuracy that you desire, right? Have you understood the point, or do you have any doubts?
I understood, sir.
Understood? Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So surface characterization, I told you, it is a common basis for describing the quantities of the fluids, and it is 14.7 psi and 60 degree Fahrenheit. Okay. Gas that you obtain is generally called SCF, measured cube or meters. Oil in STB or stock tank of meter cube. Gas oil ratio SCF by SCB. These are general, standard condition, the way we characterize that. Also in the standard condition, we characterize it by a parameter called the API, right? So oil has, we convert the specific gravity at 60 degree Fahrenheit, whatever it is, specific gravity. Specific gravity is again density upon density. Density of oil by density of water at gamma O will be rho O by rho W. So this rho O by rho W each at 60 degree Fahrenheit, and atmospheric pressure. This is fixed generally. Water density we know 1 gram per cc, and rho O we measure. So and then we find this, and then we use this in this formula, and then we get API. API is how we generally characterize our oil. In the typical petroleum parlance, we generally don't use density or say specific gravity. Although we can use, we can they can ask you questions, but you should API is a way. API we can characterize the oil also. How you will see? So you can see API is inversely proportional to specific gravity. The lighter the fluid, the higher the API. Correct. The lighter the fluid, the higher the API. So this is very important. So this is how we characterize. So generally 50 plus API is considered very good oil in terms of its quality, and it will generally have very high lighter fractions. Oil with API maybe 30 and below, so maybe 25, 20, it will be very heavy oil. It will be heavy oil. It will have a lot of heavy fractions, and the density will be high. It will be close to the water density 0.9, 0.95, something like that. Okay. So again, I am saying that these are all approximations. I mean, these are not hard and fast like this has to be this. So there is no fixed definition, as you can see. And the table here, it only provides a brief understanding. I mean, some broad understanding of how. You can also find this table in TarakML. Maybe the values will be different, but I encourage you to you should read it, and you should remember. I mean, conflict with each other because different authors use different values, but at least have a broad idea of where the value is. I mean, 500,000 इधर उधर कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता. Okay. Yeah, that's it. Refractive index. ये भी ध्यान रखिए. Refractive index is a optical property, varies between 1.39 to 1.49 of crude oil systems. Heavier the crude, higher the refractive index, right? And lower the API gravity. This is the tendency you must remember. It is also another property which we measure to characterize oil. Fluorescence. Fluorescence is very important because it is the property that is exhibited when you subject the system to ultraviolet light. It will give a distinct color, right? And based on that color, we can say what is its API, and we can characterize it. This is the table again. Another. So the first chapter in MV, as much as I hate to say it, you have to remember certain things. But mostly we will shift to more conceptual and logical things later. But you have to, know these things. Okay. Just the color and the what will be the fluorescent color, and what color of fluorescence, and what will be the API. So here what we do generally, drill cuttings when you recover, it will also have so the cuttings, the geologist, well-site geologist, he will often do this test. He will subject the cuttings that we recover. The cuttings, if we have invaded, if we have gone through, if we have drilled the oil-bearing zone, then it will this cutting that will recover must have certain oil in it. And if we subject that to ultraviolet light, it will emit a certain color, right? And from that color, we can know the kind of API that we are expecting in the fluid, the kind of fluid that we have in the reservoir below. Again, of course, there will be testing and a lot of things will go on, but it's a preliminary idea. Fluorescence, this test becomes very difficult when we are using SOBM, the synthetic oil-based mud. If it is water-based mud, whatever oil that is strained in the reservoir rock, on the rock fragments, it has to be the reservoir oil only. But sometimes the mud itself is oil-based. Synthetic oil-based mud, it is called SOBM. Then how do you characterize? Because the mud itself will be strained. Now the mud can contaminate the rock, and the oil that you're using just to stabilize the system, just to as the drilling fluid, you can see that it can become very happy. Okay, but so initially we do this test, and the SOBM is characterized, and we know what kind of thing we are using, and then any deviation from the color from the normal SOBM, we will understand that there is some oil-bearing zone there, right? And these are certain questions for you. some questions are, yeah, some questions are food for thought. Some questions you have to answer. Some, yeah, you can think about these questions, and we can have a discussion later. And after going through this, you are free to for these questions you can refer the internet, make some notes. Okay, so for example, this thing. Okay, what is the principle? I have asked you this question. What is the principle of fractional distillation? Okay, make a list of products of distillation along with their uses. Get often asked factual questions. Like, this is not part of reservoir engineering, but still they may ask. For example, this BS6 norm. You read about sulfur. What is BS6? Bharat State 6 norms of environmental pollution. What is the limit of sulfur? Go, read about these things. I mean, these are not directly related, but they may feature. Okay, they may feature in your question. This question you have to answer. Okay, this is directly related to your understanding subject. What is the composition? Okay, by what name? LPG, liquefied petroleum gas. What is the composition? Just know this, because they can ask directly the question. LPG composition, A, B, C, D. This. They can ask factual questions like that. These are some links you can go and you can study. That's the end of the slide and today's discussion. Let me discard. Okay. And so you can, after going through this presentation and your notes, whatever you have noted while we have discussing, you can you will appear the questions that you have been given by Nikhil. It's in the WhatsApp group. Feel free to solve them, and if you have doubts, we'll discuss in the next class, right? That is all for today. Any questions? Can we call it a day? Okay. Thank you. You can leave the meeting.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.